is just the tip of the iceberg. I think what we're seeing in Minnesota, which is billions of dollars of fraud that hurts our most vulnerable people, is dwarfed by what I saw in California, which is whole-scale cultural malfeasance around healthcare. They realized that they could pay doctors to move people into hospice. And so now they don't have access to regular Medicare anymore. So people are dying because they can't get care.
In this episode, I'm sitting down with Dr. Mehmet Oz, the administrator of the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, CMS. He oversees programs that constitute a quarter of the entire U.S. federal budget.
They're also buying the beneficiary numbers from Medicare patients. There's a market for that. The magnitude of fraud there, we believe, is approximating $4 billion just in hospice and home health care.
As we near the one-year mark of the Trump administration, we discuss their efforts to cut waste, lower drug prices, and transform health in America.
For decades, Americans have been paying 3 times more than Europeans and other developed nations. If it's the same product made in the same factory, often in America, it should cost the same in America as it does everywhere else.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Dr. Mehmet Oz, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Well, thank you for having me on. We have names that are equally difficult, I think, at times.
Well, let's start with a very difficult topic, frankly. I saw that you and the Deputy Secretary of HHS, Jim O'Neill, went to Minnesota to personally look at fraud. And I'm kind of wondering what you actually did there, what you found there. A lot of people are interested.
Well, Mike Stewart joined us as well. He's Chief Counsel for the Health and Human Services. And the reason we sent 3 major administration officials out to Minnesota is we care about the programs all over the country, but when we see problems at the scale that's happening in Minnesota, you want to understand how it happened. How did we get here? And it's probably worth going back a little bit and understanding what the whole purpose of Medicaid was. It was created with Medicare in 1965. It is the ultimate payer of last resort. It's the entity that catches you and addresses a moral obligation of government to take care of its most needy citizens. Now, Hubert Humphrey, who was from Minnesota, a senator whose name adorns the building I work in, the Humphreys building, is famed for having said that it's the moral obligation of government to take care of those at the dawn of life, our children, and we cover 53% of children. Take care of those at the twilight of life, seniors, especially what we call dual eligible seniors, which means they're on Medicare, but they don't have any money. So they can't pay the copay, so they have Medicaid that helps them as well. And then Humphrey said there's an obligation to take care of those in the shadows. That haunting use of the light metaphor has always caught my attention. Those in the shadows are folks with substance use disorder, emotional problems. People just have trouble dealing with the complexities of life. So when you're dealing with that group of individuals, and we probably all know people in our lives that have some of those characteristics, it's imperative that we're there to take care of them. Some of the ways we do that involve providing home and community-based services. So when we're paying for these services that are based in your home, the person providing those services is often not a professional. It's much more difficult to assert that you actually got a service, and that's where the opportunities for fraud expand, and that's what we were investigating in Minnesota.
And so I saw that the number expanded. I think it was up to from 1.3 billion to 1.8 billion recently, right? And then I saw that you're actually looking into other states as well. But what did you specifically find on this fact-finding trip?
So we spoke to a bunch of whistleblowers, and we discovered that there has been for years a cover-up. Whether it was done at the highest levels of government, I can't assert that. I don't know that. But I know culturally you were dissuaded, intimidated from speaking up about the fact that you thought there was fraud happening. And anytime people raised the possibility that, for example, the Somalian subpopulation, who have different cultural mores than the folks who have historically been in Minnesota, might be taking advantage of systems that were built for Minnesota nice people. And this is what was told to me by people working in the Department of Health and Human Services there, from folks who are police, law enforcement. They were witnessing it, but if they said something, one woman was walked out of the building and censored for a while, then allowed to come back because they couldn't discover or at least assert anything that she had done wrong. But when she came back, she was basically shuttled around, so could not play a real role. in the government anymore after she had raised concerns about what was going on with this home and community-based service monies. We also learned that these 14 programs that they themselves have acknowledged were problems were so poorly audited. And the reasons for that, we spoke to the auditor in the state, is that the people who were supposed to be running these programs didn't know how to do this audit. So the trip to Minnesota recently culminated with a visit to a building called the Griggs Building. This is a building decades old. It was a textile mill. They made linen there, converted into an office building. But Jan, you wouldn't walk in this building. It's a bad part of town. It's all boarded up windows. You know, it looks like a communist office building. And yet, apparently there were 400 businesses running out of there in the last couple of years that had generated about $380 million of bills for the federal taxpayer or the state of Minnesota. And these are all social service businesses. So as you start to probe into how this beehive of corruption arose, the question does come up, you know, who owns the building? Like, how did this even come about? The building owner would not let us go into the building, although I know, because there have been search warrants in the past, that basically you have a bunch of empty offices with maybe one computer terminal on the side of it. You don't have this bustling community of people trying to do good for other Minnesotans. You know, these are a bunch of folks that were scam artists, we think, taking advantage of a naive system. And here's the hard part to fathom. I don't want everyone to take a deep breath now. And Minnesota, which is cold this time of year, is just the tip of the iceberg. I think what we're seeing in Minnesota, which is billions of dollars of fraud, that hurts our most vulnerable people and puts them at risk, because you steal not only their money, but you can steal their lives by putting them at risk for bad services provided at the wrong time that actually take away opportunities for others to get treatment. But what we're seeing in Minnesota is the tip of the iceberg, because it is dwarfed by what I saw in California, which is whole-scale cultural malfeasance around healthcare. There is a acceptance that you need to be in the fraud business, especially in Los Angeles. And the magnitude of fraud there, we believe, is approximating $4 billion just in hospice and home health care. And I want to spend a few minutes walking you through what's really happening there, because if it's reflective of what might happen in other parts of the country, or might already be happening elsewhere, it's very concerning for the core infrastructure of federally funded health care.
There's this perception that some Americans just don't get any health care, right? Because it's a private system.
So Medicare and Medicaid were created in 1965 to make sure we did have a social safety net for health care. Medicare deals with older Americans. Over the age of 65, you pretty much get Medicare. We have a bunch of people younger than 65 who qualify for, you know, not common reasons. And then you have a Medicaid program designed for people who are generally beneath 138% of the poverty level. It's a bizarre number, but it happened to turn out that way from Obamacare. So most states will provide Medicaid to the working poor or the folks who are unable to make ends meet financially. We have other programs as well that we offer for children, for example. The Veterans Administration offers programs for our vets. But most people can get access to health care if they're willing to either fill out the paperwork or, for whatever reason, qualify. There's less than 10% of Americans who don't have health care of one type or another, and we're continuing to try to make that number even better. But the system works if people are paid appropriately for doing their jobs. And it is true that often people from other countries don't understand why we don't just socialize at all. I think we have a system that works better because it supports market forces to drive quality care. And I say that because in other countries, they'll do things that will cap prices. When you cap prices in whether it's rental income in apartments, or you do it for medications or doctor's care, you actually pervert the market forces that would normally provide highest quality care. And so we see right now in Europe, for example, because of price caps on pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical companies don't provide their best new drugs to the Europeans as quickly. It often delays several years. And you actually start to see a difference in survival rates of chronic diseases in Europe compared to the US because of some of those limitations. Now, this is all addressable, and this is part of a larger strategy that the president has for healthcare.
Well, so this is kind of the obvious question here. Two obvious questions. One is, just hot off the presses, Great American Healthcare Plan, right? And the other one is, marquee sort of policy of this administration, I think, is the drug pricing, and which kind of sounds to me a bit like a cap, given everything you're saying. So why don't you kind of disambiguate that for me, and let's talk about the Great American Healthcare Plan.
So the Great American Healthcare Plan has several important pillars. One of them is to make sure that we slash drug prices, and we do that by asking Congress to codify what we have successfully been doing at the president's request this year, which is to allow most favored nation drug pricing. It's not a price cap, quite the opposite. So here's what the deal is. We're making the point that for decades, Americans have been paying 3 times more than Europeans and other developed nations have been paying for the exact same drugs made in the same facilities. And that's a problem because America's already underwriting a lot of the development expense. We pay for the research. We help these drugs get crafted. We provide incentives through NIH and other sources to make sure that novel research is able to prosper. So we develop these drugs. Once they're developed, and maybe we foot the bill for that disproportionately, at least when you buy the drugs for your people, if it's the same product made in the same factory, often in America, it should cost the same in America as it does everywhere else. That's what the president has been saying. He says, give us most favored nation drug pricing. Whatever the best prices out there for the developed countries, we should pay that. We shouldn't pay 3 times that. So he said, go to industry and ask them what it takes for this to occur. He said, don't go in there and say you're going to take them out of business. Don't put price caps on there. And also recognize we don't want to stunt their innovation. We want them to be able to create as many new novel solutions to cure cancer and heart disease and lots of other conditions as possible. Now, that's not a price cap because inherently it's a negotiation. If industry doesn't like it, they can leave. They don't have to participate. However, that's not what's happened. The reality is when you look people in the eyes, like I'm looking at you, Jan, and you say, you have been using a system that's not fair to the American people. They will say, yeah, we knew one day you'd come knocking. You figured it out. We get it. It's not sustainable. Let's figure out a solution so we don't go into a troubled area financially. We can still innovate. And we'll gently, over time, move towards the most favored nation drug pricing. These were hard negotiations. It took a while, but the president was adamant that it needed to happen. Industry recognized that they weren't getting out of it this time, so they voluntarily agreed to some of the rules that will now govern this process, which means give our most vulnerable people most favored nation drug pricing immediately. So all the Medicaid patients usually are qualifying. Make sure that you give some of the best, most important products to Medicare for the seniors at most favored nation drug pricing. Those lower the taxes that we pay, but it also lowers the overall cost of services of these products to that senior population. And then every new product that you release has to be at this new fair value, equaling it to other countries. In return, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to give you access to more people, so you have a bigger market. And we also want to help you when you negotiate with countries overseas to not let them take advantage of you. So this is something that is important for the country. It's fair. Folks are agreeing with it, even in industry. We're asking Congress to codify it, make it permanent so that it doesn't go away after this administration's done, and we don't have pharmaceutical companies running away afterwards saying, the next administration is not strong or we can get away with not doing this anymore. We just want this to be the law of the land so that we're just fairly treated.
Dr. Oz, one quick moment. We're going to take a break. And folks, we're going to be right back. And we're back with Dr. Mehmet Oz, Administrator of CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. You're responsible for something like 1/4 of American government spending. It's $1.5 trillion plus. So there's a lot of places where that money kind of is being scooped away. You have to deal with all of this, right?
Let me share with you what I saw in Nevada and California, because it's chilling, because it's not just about lowlife stealing money. What's happened in California is a tolerance, an acceptance of fraud. Everyone's involved. It just seemed when I was talking to different folks, again, whistleblowers, community organizations, the U.S. attorney, it's so rampant that you don't even know how to get your arms around it. And it happened for a bunch of reasons. There was a general desire not to offend people. This happened in Somalia with the Somalians in Minnesota. It's also happening with some of these mafia folks in Southern California. But they realized that they could pay doctors to move people into hospice. The hospice is designed for the last 6 months of your life. It means you're going to die. These hospice programs are created when the most common reason that you enter it is cancer. But these days, not everyone with cancer dies, but also you're putting a lot of people with Alzheimer's and other conditions in there. So it became a little harder to police whether people are going into hospice. But what happens if 100% of the people in hospice survive 6 months? Like, nobody dies. And that happens
Doesn't sound like hospice.
Doesn't sound like hospice.
Right.
Doctors are being paid to send people inappropriately to hospice. Now, that's a problem, Jan, because if you're put into hospice, you actually give up the rest of your healthcare protection. You no longer get traditional Medicare benefits because you're in hospice, you're dying. So we're not going to pay all these extra expenses for things that aren't going to benefit you because you've decided to pull back. Voluntarily, you've decided that you're not going to go out there and try to get everything done for you possible to help you live longer. You've made peace with the end. But people are put on hospice who don't know it. They don't realize it. And so now they don't have access to regular Medicare anymore. So people are dying because they can't get care because they were falsely tricked into being on hospice. Now, that's a major concern for me. But then I began to look into how this could possibly happen. How is it that we've gotten 7 times more hospice in California over the last several years? Do we have 7 times more people dying? Like, what's going on here? And you begin to realize it's systemic fraud. Everyone decided not to do anything about this. We're not going to look at it. It's too painful, too difficult. Maybe some groups may benefit financially from not checking into this. The doctors are getting engaged so much in the hospice that it's beginning to undermine basic ethos of the healthcare profession. And I'll just tell you one whistleblower story that'll chill you, and then we should move on to the good news in healthcare because there's plenty of it. I was talking to a gentleman who owns 5 hospice centers. Now, if you own 5 hospices, you have to ask yourself why. You own 5 hospices because you're hiding the ball. You want to have a lot of patients split over a lot of different centers so that we can't track you as well. Anyways, he's building this beautiful mansion, massive house, because he's got a lot of money, right? Because he's stealing money from these hospice programs. The plumber comes in and says, you know, I see you're in the hospice business. I've got a little side hustle. I own a hospice business. And the guy who's the doctor says, really? Because, yeah, I'm a plumber, but I got a hospice business. You don't have to really be a doctor to own hospice. And then the carpenter who's next to him, who's building the cabinet, says, hey, what do you know? I got a hospice business too. So both of the folks who are doing plumbing and carpentering have side hustle businesses, the contractors in hospice. The guy building the house makes a lot of money. And so that guy, I started asking him, well, how'd you make all this money? Because, well, you know, I go to doctors. I mean, low-life doctors? No. I go like to the doctors at Cedars-Sinai. Now, this is an allegation. I can't prove this. But I don't know why he'd lie to me. You know, I'm trying to learn, and he's willing to offer some insights. He says, the doctors at this hospital are willing to send me some patients. And I said, that's weird, really. They just pay them, and they give me, yeah. He goes, the doctor said if I gave him $1,000 a month or something, that he'd send me patients. And then I started to do that in other hospitals. And then I'd ask the doctors to send me the patients from the hospital directly. And they say, oh, no. We can't send you the patients from our hospitals directly because our board members own hospice. And the board members of the hospital want the hospital to send patients to their hospice. So there's a general perversion of the entire healthcare ecosystem.
I mean, absolutely astonishing. There's been a lot of activity, of really profound activity, I would say. Some very significant policies, especially most recently. We've got the new dietary guidelines, the flipping of the food pyramid. We've got, you know, aligning the vaccine schedule with something closer to what we see in some European countries, a lot less shots, you know, basically. But when you look back at this year, what would you say were the sort of banner concrete accomplishments or the banner most consequential shifts?
The tech transformation of CMS will allow us to meet patients where they are. When we wrote our objectives and key results, there were 2 really important pillars. Empower patients, because if they're truly aware of what's happening in their lives, they'll take better care of themselves. They're the ultimate stakeholder. But they'll also drive efficiency in the market. A smart patient, not all patients have to be smart, but enough of them have to be smart enough to know that this is a good thing to do, and I'm going to take this service, and I'm not going to do that because it's unnecessary. That's what we want. And the second big thing, so empower patients and then incentivize providers. Provide financial incentives for doctors and hospitals and pharma companies to do the right thing. Now, make that happen, you have to have data flow. You have to have information that is transparent to all. And so the data that we have at CMS is harnessed in these old systems. If anyone who knows computers, these are COBOL-based systems built in the 70s. We don't even have engineers who know how to program that way anymore. So we are rebuilding the basic infrastructure of how the system works. And we have signed up in this tech ecosystem every major company, incumbent insurgent that you can think of that's involved in health technology is a signatory. They're all pledging to work with us to accomplish the goal I just outlined, to allow patients and the system to talk more effectively. There will be, within this year, apps that if you have metabolic syndrome, diabetes, the companies will be able to build these tools, these apps. You'll be able to use them as a Medicare beneficiary. We'll pay for it as long as it delivers better outcomes. I don't care about engagement, I care about outcomes. And the fact that we have created an entire ecosystem to bring technology, including artificial intelligence, into Medicare and Medicaid are huge salutary advances for the system, because it allows us to catch up with the rest of the information technology in America. We don't stream content the way we used to. We don't order food the same way. We don't travel in rideshare car, Ubers and Lyfts like we used to. We don't bank like we used to. Yet we do healthcare the way we did in the 60s. And by bringing healthcare, kicking and screaming into 2026, we're going to allow it to develop the same efficiencies and the same systemic improvements that we know the American people deserve. My hope is while we're in these seats, we'll be able to deliver on this promise, because it will be the single most important thing we do to dramatically drive down the increase in costs, yet to improve the quality of care. Because the most expensive thing we do, Jan, without question, is deliver bad quality care. Why? If a bad thing happens to you, I paid someone to do it to you. I'm paying someone who's capable to fix it, and then I've got to pay for downstream complications. Let's leap past all that and use the efficiencies that information and data can bring to the system, including the promise of AI, to deliver higher quality care to you. And by doing that, we'll be able to afford health care. And if we don't fix the current healthcare financial system in this country, we will end up becoming a big healthcare system with a small country attached.
Well, Dr. Mehmet Oz, such a pleasure to have had you on.
God bless you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for joining Dr. Mehmet Oz and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.